Hello there. My name is Eugeniusz, or simply Zhenya. My dear friend Philip, the artistic director of our cabaret, likes to say, if Eugenia is 150%, my dear 1 year old, but that's not really what this story is about. My beloved wife, Joanna Usarek, who passed away 4 years ago, left behind 2 remarkable books. One of them is titled, About a Good Man and Other Monsters. I'm now sharing fragments of that book here on YouTube, and I'd like to invite you to listen to this very special audiobook. I truly hope you'll enjoy it, and at the bat, there's a little surprise waiting for you, a beautiful song performed by me.
If the Holy Spirit had wanted to show her compassion, I didn't know one could cry like that. When I spoke with the doctor after his death, and when I collected the death certificate, I was weeping so uncontrollably that everyone must have thought I had lost the most tenderly loved father. To this day, I don't know whether Eugeniusz was truly that close to me, or whether it was the antique grandeur of the tragedy that struck me down, or simply the tragic nature of human fate itself. In his wallet I found a small note, a shopping list he had made, perhaps for a modest gathering after the funeral. Bread, cold cuts, chicken, a bottle of vodka. I removed it, thinking that if Christina were to find it, her heart would surely break. With wrenching compassion, I imagined how unbearably she must feel in that situation, for after all she was not devoid of emotion. Yet, paradoxically, somewhere on another plane, something in me rebelled at the thought that I should inform her at all. I would have preferred to let it go, just as Eugeniusz himself had done after his mother's death. She came back on the first plane. Zhenya and I met her at the airport, and on our way home in the taxi I began to tell her what had happened. Well, in everyday life I was cautious and rather stiff with her. Her field of sensitivity was too narrow for me to express my own without consequences. But the shock of Eugeniusz's death made me for a brief moment speak to her as to someone close. I forgot my caution and was simply myself, without any inner censorship. I wasn't really saying anything special. It was simply that something within me was radiating, some deep emotion. But I remember saying, among other things, that when I heard about Eugeniusz's mother's death, I asked him if I could help in any way. And he said no. He had to handle everything himself. And I, selfish fool that I was, didn't think simply to go to him, to be there with him without asking anything. And as I spoke, I suddenly felt something rise between Christina and me. A wall, almost physically tangible, a barrier of estrangement, as if all at once, instead of a living human being, I saw before me a statue of stone. If that statue could have wept, or spoken with a human voice and said, "My God," where was I then? How could I have been such a selfish fool, going off to those damned Italy? Perhaps it might have come to life. But that single act of remorse would have called into question not only her decision to leave, but an entire chain of earlier ones. And Christina had never learned sincerity or honesty with herself. She had, in fact, chosen precisely the opposite. And in reaction to Eugeniusz's death, and all that had happened, she must have felt only that life was vile, that once again, life had played some nasty trick on her, just as she believed life was spiteful because things kept getting lost, swallowed by the omnipresent clutter, or that she was exceptionally unlucky because her things kept breaking, when in truth she ruined them through her own neglect. In such a state, the unpretentious sense of guilt I had carelessly expressed must have frozen her completely. And she had no other choice but to wall herself off from me, behind that same barrier of estrangement, Someone once told me that just a few minutes after a car crash, he happened to arrive at the scene. In the shattered car sat the dead parents, while their teenage daughter ran up and down the road, frantically searching for the shoes that had been torn from her mother's feet at the moment of the crash. Christina, like me, was in shock, but when set against the whole of her inner biography, that shock awakened in her an entirely different field of emotions and forced upon her different choices. Let this, at least to some extent, explain the further course of events. After we arrived home, we called Halina, a long-time friend of the family, and asked her to come over because Christina wanted to see her. Halina had met with Eugeniusz a day or two before his death, and being a woman of vivid and delicate sensibility, she was particularly deeply shaken by what had happened. For in truth, everyone without exception was shaken. Calls to the hospital, asking about Juliusz's condition, went on without pause until late in the evening. Halina arrived, and the course of that evening, in a shockingly spectacular way, mirrored the entire drama within my mother, that monstrous trap a person sets for themselves when they cut themselves off from the truth about who they are. Every act of dishonesty toward oneself, whether it springs from a kind of self-defense, from spiritual laziness, from ambition, or from reflexes imposed by social convention, narrows the space of truth within us in favor of falsehood. I put the words in quotation marks, because I would like to remove for a moment the stigma of moral judgment. Only then can the matter be seen as a mechanism. Consequently, the space in which we can move with sincerity becomes more and more constricted, producing ever greater tension within us and ever deeper distortion of our perception, the very instrument within us that allows authentic recognition of another human being, an authentic recognition of ourselves, becomes brutally crippled. I no longer remember the moment of greeting, nor how it all actually began. It was enough that, just moments after Halina's arrival, they had barely exchanged a few words about Juliusz. Christina went over to her suitcases and began unpacking them, pulling out various trinkets and garments she had brought from Italy for herself and her friends. During her travels, she would patiently collect the more interesting items of clothing that her Western friends no longer wanted, haul them back to Poland, and then give them away to various people. She took out blouses and skirts one after another, making Halina try them on and comment on how they looked. My mind went utterly blank. One must suppose it was some variation of searching for shoes after a crash, yet all of us froze inside at the sight of it. Halina, kind-hearted but submissive, and of a much younger generation, tried on one piece after another like an automaton, her eyes filled with pleading and horror. I no longer remember how it ended, whether the clothes simply ran out or someone stopped it. Perhaps I did myself. We began to talk about Juliusz, or rather about the situation that had arisen after his death. Christina was determined to take charge of the funeral and bury him in my grandparents' grave. She hated Juliusz's wife and his children. Truly, it's hard for me to find another word. And was arming herself for battle, anticipating that his family might object. She was agitated and full of aggression. At one point I remembered that I had his wallet, the keys to the apartment on Brzeska Street, and the death certificate. I handed those things over to her. At the sight of the keys, she hadn't known I had them. The thought struck her like lightning. Then let's get dressed, jump in a taxi and go to Brzeska. We must take everything from there. What take? I asked. Everything, so it won't fall into his wife's hands. I said, Woman, what on earth are you talking about? Juliusz hasn't even cooled yet. You've only been in Warsaw an hour, and your first thought is to go to Brzeska and ransack his flat. Yes, that's exactly what I'll do. We'll go and take everything. Take everything? What do you mean? What exactly? She began listing appliances and items one after another, the fridge, books, clothing, the radio, perhaps the television. I don't remember what else. The telephone. The telephone, I said with ironic dismay. And how exactly will you take the phone? You're not going to tear it out of the wall, are you? Then, with a sudden furious cry, I can still hear her shouting, I'll rip it out. Yes, I'll rip it out. I'll tear it from the wall. By then I had long been left alone on the battlefield. Halina mumbled something timidly and fell silent. Zhenya tried somehow to speak to her, but soon he too gave up. They sat silent and stunned. She was a living fury. I had seen her in similar fits many times, but never like this. I had the feeling I was facing Satan himself. I think it was then, or perhaps later, looking back with the eye of memory, that the thought struck me. Satan is a mechanism, and that Satan does not know he is Satan. With a categorical firmness rare for me, I told her to do whatever she wanted. But neither I nor Zhenya would take part in anything like it. This provoked another fit of fury, this time directed squarely at me. You hate me, she screamed, behaving like a demon of hatred herself. You won't cry over me. When I die, you'll be glad. She was alluding to the fact that I had broken down in tears when telling her about Juliusz's death. You'll say, good she's dead. Oh, yes, good she's dead. She mocked in a grotesque imitation of how I would supposedly say it. I don't know. If the Holy Spirit had wanted to approach her then and show her compassion, for he surely would have had reason, such a flood of hateful rage poured from her that it would likely have struck him down before he could even come near. But I had no ambition to be the Holy Spirit, so that problem passed me by. I said with icy calm, no, I have too much dignity to say such a thing. I later learned that she had called another acquaintance to enlist her in the assault on Brzeska Street in place of me and Zhenya. The lady in question, practical and strong-minded, tried to persuade her of the impropriety of such an idea, if only from a simple legal standpoint. But when she realized that Christina was obstinately set on her plan, the three of them got into a taxi and drove to Praga. Fortunately, Christina was unable to open the door to Juliusz's mother's apartment. She had never been there before. Her friend took the keys from her hand and began fiddling with the lock herself, pretending she was trying to make it work. So at last she said no, she couldn't manage either. And thanks to this small ruse, they managed to dissuade Christina from her intentions and persuade her to hand the keys over to the family. A day or two later, Christina called me and demanded that I go to Juliusz's wife to retrieve some scarf left at Brzeska and some book. It was absurd and embarrassing, clearly reeking of helpless anger. I tried to persuade her to let it go, that there would be time enough after the funeral, but she slammed down the receiver. She sent Halina to fetch the scarf. The next day she convened a meeting about the funeral. She was furious that her plan to exclude Juliusz's family from his burial had fallen through. Taking advantage of the larger gathering, she declared firmly that at the cemetery we all had to position ourselves in such a way as to demonstrate that we were a separate group, clearly dissociating ourselves from his family. She began to discuss the technical details of this idea. She behaved as though it was self-evident that everyone was ready to be as zealous an actor in her theatre of hatred as she herself was. I interrupted her, saying that I didn't know about the others, but I would categorically take no part in it. It It was out of the question that at Juliusz's funeral I should manifest anything, or think about how to position myself, or in any way participate in such a sick spectacle. She flew into a rage, screaming with hatred, demanding to know why I hated her so, and ordered me out of her house. Into my grandparents' grave she had a symbolic plaque set, bearing Juliusz's name. And it would have been a beautiful gesture, if not for the whole story that plaque now symbolizes.